Jonathan Fields, here with an episode of Good Life Project Jam Sessions. So hanging out again with my good buddy Clay Bear, who's the founder of Spindos and crowdfundinghacks.com. The topic we're talking about today are gatekeepers. Who or what are actually keeping you from doing that thing that you feel in your heart you really want to do? We've had a lot of conversations about this over the years.
Yeah.
You know, both of us, I think, tend to be people who, if we feel it, we do it.
Right. Right.
But I haven't always been that way. I don't know if you've always been that way. And the world, you know, the world of gatekeepers and people who are in a position to give you access to that thing that you most want to do in the world,
right,
seems to be changing in a really profound way and incredibly quickly.
Yeah, definitely. I think, again, our education system teaches us, right, that there are these gatekeepers. And very recently, there were real gates and real people standing in front of them and real people who could tell you no. But even just this, just the Good Life Project, right? 15 years ago, if you wanted to do this, you had to get somebody from NBC or CBS to...
5 years ago.
5 years ago, right? Even 5 years ago, to say yes. And now you can just pick yourself and do it and go around the gatekeeper. And you know, crowdfunding platforms like Kickstarter and Indiegogo are really just kind of a tactical representation of people. It gives them the platform to pick themselves and say, I'm going to finish this documentary, or I'm going to, you know, do this creative project and pick myself and find. What's interesting is, again, back to the whole, when people do marketing or launch a thing, they want to reach everybody. How do I get in the New York Times? How do I get in Mashable? And do this, go through Kickstarter and look at how many backers are on a given of the funded projects. You know, search the funded projects. Right. It's almost always under 1,000 people, unless you're Jake Brownstein. But even a lot of the funded projects are less than 1,000 people, 650, 425. Our friend AJ Leon, you know, 430. Raise enough money to execute and do your creative project with a very small group, small tribe of people that care, and I just love how these platforms can allow people to circumvent the gatekeepers and ignore the gatekeepers. There's lots of stories of people who went up and down Sand Hill Road in Silicon Valley and got a no from every VC in the valley of nobody wants to buy a watch that, you know, talks to your phone, that does these things, and then you go to Kickstarter and it turns out a bunch of people do.
They'll line up and say.
Now they come back. The gatekeepers come running.
Right. I think that's such an interesting phenomenon. Also, is that. You know, you think about the role of the gatekeeper these days very often is become the funder.
Yeah, right.
You know, so in the classic equation, it's like, you know, for a publisher, a record producer, or a venture capitalist, like they're the person who says, this is good enough for me to make my money back times X.
Right.
You know, and that's the fundamental equation that's going on in their head. And that's what the decisions are based on. It's fundamentally, and there are probably some, you know, more specialized where it's really about, I want to do something bigger. You know, it's more cause-oriented, conscious. But fundamentally, you know, somebody who's putting up resources wants to know that there's the smallest amount of risk that they'll first get their money back, and then second, make a multiple of that money.
Yeah.
You know, whereas when we're doing this ourselves, you know, and we have, if we can have that conversation, not with the funder, but the person who we seek to serve.
Right.
That final person.
Right.
It's a radically different conversation. And they're all willing to take very tiny risks in the name of possibly having this gift that you want to bring to the world.
Yeah.
In a way that one huge gatekeeper would never do. So when you actually tap, you know, these crowdfunding platforms, essentially that's what you're doing.
It flips the equation completely, because you're 100% right. VCs and, you know, TV producers and movie producers, they know that a certain percentage of their investments are going to be flops, so they really do need 10x and 50x and 100x on the winners. When you're doing crowdfunding, if you're saying, I'm going to finish this documentary, and you get the digital download and a sweatshirt and whatever, you're fragmenting the risk among the patrons as opposed to the investor. I think that's a really good insight.
Yeah, and I think also, you know, there's people, so let's dive a little bit deeper into this whole concept of crowdfunding. And if you don't know what that is, it's platforms like Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and there are a wide variety of others now that essentially allow you to say, hey, I have an idea. It's a movie, it's an album, it's a song, it's a piece of art, it's a thing, it's like a book, whatever it is. And nobody traditionally is going to pay me to create this. But I think there are a lot of people out there who would want it, you know, eventually. So I'm going to put it up there and let the world know that I want to create this. And essentially, a lot of people are using these platforms now to let people raise their hand before you actually devote the time, or the money, the resources to create yourself, to say, yeah, I'm in. So what I think is fascinating about it is people are using it not only to fund what they're doing and take the risk out of me creating it, but to test interest.
Right.
You know, and that's, I think, really interesting, because one of the biggest things that creators struggle with is, will people care?
Right.
You know, and that's one of the things that gatekeepers think about, right?
Mm-hmm.
But on a more visceral level, on a personal, like, judgment level.
Right.
A lot of people, I'm thinking about, you know, like creating an album or a book or a company, whatever it is. You know, like, will people care enough for me to actually do this, to invest my heart and my soul and my money and years potentially to create it? So you can use it not only as a funding platform, but as a way to test that concept.
Yeah, absolutely. Funding is a key part of crowdfunding, obviously, but it's not the only reason. And even Eric Mijakovsky, who raised $10 million for the Pebble Watch, he didn't get rich off of that and take the $5 million and go live on an island. He had to invest that back. So people generally don't get, wealthy off of the crowdfunding. It allows them to create their dream and ship their dream project, or finish their book, or finish their movie. And like you said, it really does. It allows you to not experience this big splash of failure, and instead test things, like we were talking about the lean startup stuff earlier. I don't see a lot of people talking about crowdfunding platforms as kind of a lean startup tool, but it's really lean startup for creative projects. To say, if I can't get 500 people to say that they want to see my documentary, maybe I shouldn't film it.
Yeah, and I think that's such a really good point. You know, like, yes, you can use these things to get past the gatekeeper, but you can also use them to help you figure out whether you should even be doing it in the first place.
Exactly, right, yeah. Market validation, how many people want this.
Yeah.
And it's not just a binary yes or no, they funded it. There's feedback and there's comments and there's updates and what people want to see. So it's a great way to interact with the market before the project is finished.
Yeah, and if people are, like, one of the big concerns is, like, what if I fail? And people are worried about being judged for trying to do something big, raising money, doing all this stuff, or investing, and then failing. Well, it's like, I would rather be judged a little bit for testing an idea and having a failed Kickstarter project that cost me almost nothing to put together, and I can do this over and over and over until I get something where it does work. I'd rather be judged a little bit for not having my Kickstarter project funded than have to face my internal and external judgment of doing something really substantial and devoting months or years and thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds or millions of dollars to something that then fails because it never should have been done.
Absolutely, and I think another reason I love crowdfunding is embedded in these platforms are these sort of meta skills that we need to succeed regardless of what we're doing. So if we think about what we know about marketing and what you're very good at, storytelling, copywriting, pricing, scarcity, timing, it's all built into this thing. To execute a Kickstarter project, there's literally a spot where you have to do each one of those in a fairly small page, and I think those are very useful, repeatable skills that you're going to do in any project. I've seen people who came from finance or came from a corporate world or came from somewhere else, and they weren't good at marketing and storytelling and copywriting and pricing and scarcity and all the stuff that we study, and by virtue of needing to do that in a pretty small space for a relatively short period of time in a project, they've learned that and then they've applied those skills later on. So I think crowdfunding is kind of the ultimate mixing board for smart marketers. I think people like us look at it and salivate and say, oh, I can tweak all these knobs, right?
And it also tells you, building on that point, it tells you what skill sets you don't have that you're going to need that you might not have realized that you're going to need. So you get to that point where you're building the campaign, you're like, I don't know how to do that, or I can't write this way, or I don't, but I'm going to need that to actually build the thing or create the thing that I want to do. It identifies that really early on so that you don't get caught.
Right. If you get good at all these things in storytelling and copywriting, and there's built-in fulfillment risk on Kickstarter, right? That's why I tell people you need to price your thing cheaper than Amazon would sell it or cheaper than Zappos would sell it, because there's no fulfillment risk. If you order shoes on Zappos tomorrow, they're here the next day, shipped for free, 100%, But if you invest in my documentary about Al McGuire, that may or may not, there's a lot of fulfillment risk, and a lot of Kickstarter and crowdfunding projects, a lot of them, some of them don't happen, not a huge percentage, but some of them do happen, but maybe 6 months late. By the time the Pebble Watch finally shipped, some people weren't so enamored with it. So you need to, price your things at a discount, because these are your first customers, the people that are betting on you before the thing even exists.
And again, this is really just one example that we're talking about, but the bigger, like, let's zoom the lens out, the bigger conversation is really just, it's the concept of the role of gatekeepers in your ability to do that thing that you most want to do, and how technology, to a large extent technology, is profoundly changing the game across almost every conceivable thing that you would want to do. And the idea of basically saying, I have the ability to chunk the risk, to get tremendous feedback very early with not a lot of effort, and then potentially completely circumvent the gatekeepers, is present now in a way that is, if you really want to dive into how to leverage it, transformative.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a woman named Sophia that started this fashion company called Nasty Gal, and she just curated vintage clothing from shops. She would drive to LA and go to the vintage shops and pick it, and she just got very good at recognizing what worked, and she started with an eBay shop and grew it into this big fashion e-commerce business. And then, of course, she picked herself, and now the gatekeepers, the investors, come running, and she finally did eventually take money, but she didn't need to, and she did it on her terms and totally flips the script.
And I think that's the sort of like a great wrap up for this. It's nice to sort of like be in that place.
Well, now you've got all the leverage in that in that conversation.
Awesome, great conversation around gatekeepers. So I'm Jonathan Fields, hanging out with Clay Hebert, signing off for Good Life Project Jam Sessions.